Welcome to Lesson 13 Workbook Exercise Video for Hebrew 1 and 2, Bright Old Testament 502-504 Online Edition. In this lesson, we'll be reviewing the exercises related to the Vav consecutive as well as the imperative. I'm not going to give a lot of examples from each set of exercises, but enough to make sure that you understand the concept and can do your homework. Let's get started. We're going to take exercises from the first two set of exercises, Exercise 1 and Exercise 2. Exercise 1 has the Vav consecutive on the imperfect form. The exercise number 2 has the Vav consecutive on the perfect form. The first two exercise examples here are from Exercise 1, number 3 and 5. The third example here is Exercise number 2, number 4. The Vav consecutive is pretty straightforward. Simply a Vav plus a Patak plus a Yod in the first consonant for the imperfect, and Vav with a Shva for the second set of exercises for the perfect, because context will often tell us if it is a Vav consecutive. However, there are a few examples here in your exercises that are a little more confusing, and those are the ones that I want to cover to make sure that you understand. So go ahead and start with the first example here from Exercise 1, number 3. How would we parse this particular verb? This first example is a Cal imperfect 1CS from Ra'ah, to see. The first aleph is actually the preformative of the imperfect with the segol. However, this is also a Vav consecutive, but it cannot place the dagesh into the aleph according to the typical form, so the patak under the Vav actually lengthens to become a kametz. So this is a Vav consecutive Cal imperfect 1CS from Ra'ah. What about this second one, Vaya'as? This is actually a very shortened form of the more complete form of the imperfect. There is a letter that has fallen off at the end of this verb, but you should still be able to figure out how to parse this. So what is Vaya'as? The dropped letter, of course, is the hey, because this is the word asa, to do or to make. We have here a Cal imperfect 3ms. The Yod prefix is the giveaway. This is not ya'ash, to save. This is ya'as, with a sin. The hey has disappeared. It is still a Vav consecutive, which you can clearly see by the Vav with the patak and the dagesh in the next letter. What throws us in this particular word is that we have two pataks, vaya'as. This is surprising, but ya'as is actually the technical form of this verb anyway. Throwing the Vav plus the patak and the dagesh onto the verb does not actually change any of the vowels. It would have been this way whether it was a consecutive or not. What about the last one here? How do we translate and parse this particular word? This is not a Cal imperfect, this is a Cal perfect, a 2MP from Yeshav. And you can see this at the end with the perfect ending. Tem, you sat. We know that this is a Vav consecutive, although context would have to tell you, because this is a perfect verb, we don't have the patak plus the dagesh to let us know. Instead, we would have added a Vav plus a Shva under the front of this verb. However, in the typical form, the Yod would have also had a Shva, because this would have been Yashav Tem. The kametz underneath the Yod would have reduced when we added on the suffix. However, when we put two Shvas together, one under the Vav, one under the Yod, the first Shva, by rule, must become a Hirik, which would then leave us with Vav plus a Hirik and Yod with a Shva, so that we would get V. However, in order to simplify things, we just simply skip the first Shva altogether and make it Vav plus a Hirik Yod. So this is really a combination of Shvas that have caused this particular form. Again, this shows us that it is a Vav on the front of a verb, and given the context, could have been translated as a Vav consecutive. This next set of parsings comes from Part 18 of your workbook, Section 1. I just want to run through a few examples here to make sure that you understand how to parse these particular verbs. So here, how would we parse number 1? This is a straightforward Cal perfect third common plural from katav, to write. So they wrote. How about number 2? How would we parse this one? This is a standard Cal imperfect second masculine plural from katav, to write. We see the preformative, the tav, but we also see a suffix, a shurik, which tells us that this is a second masculine plural. What about number 3? How would we parse this one? This one is a bit trickier. This is a Cal imperative to MP. You can tell when you look at number 2 and then look at number 3 that what is dropped off is the preformative. We know that this is a second masculine plural because it is imperative and there is no third person imperative where a yod would have dropped off the front of this word. Even though a yod preformative and a shurik suffix is a possibility, it's not a possibility in the imperative. The imperative is second person commands. We would have had a shva underneath the kaf because we dropped off the tav with the hirik. However, 2 shvas, when combined, will force the first one to become a hirik. This is why we have a hirik underneath the kaf. So this is a Cal imperative second masculine plural from katav. What about number 18? How do we parse this one? This is a Cal imperative to ms from yada. This would be translated as no. The yod has dropped off because the yod would have combined with the original preformative so that it would have been tida. Now, because we've dropped the preformative, we also drop the vowels associated with the preformative, which takes out the yod because it had become a hirik yod, a vowel. By eliminating that preformative, we're just left with da. So this is a Cal imperative second masculine singular. What about number 21? How would we translate and parse this one? This is a Cal imperative to FP from nasa, to lift. We see the na suffix at the end here, the nun plus the commas plus the hey. However, we have lost our preformative, which would have been a tav. There is a form, again, that has a yod at the front, but it is not a second person form, so will not be an imperative, and imperatives are the only ones that drop the form off the front. So we are left with the na at the end, but no preformative, telling us that this is a Cal imperative to FP. What about number 22? Go ahead and parse that one. This form looks like something has changed, but it's actually a standard Cal perfect third common plural from asa. The hey that is typically at the end of this stem will drop before the pleasance of a long vowel, in this case a shurik, leaving just the 2 consonants of the stem. So we get asu, a Cal perfect third common plural. What about the next one, number 23? This is a Cal imperative second feminine singular. We know that it's an imperative because of the presence of the shva underneath the ayin and the fact that it ends in a hirik yod. There is no hirik yod ending by itself in either the perfect or the imperfect, meaning that this is either an object marker, something to me, which I suppose is possible, but the shva is what really gives it away when combined with that hirik yod. We've had a vowel reduction that has taken place. We've lost something off the front of this verb. In this case, we've lost the tav that would have had the vowel. Instead, we're just left with asi. So this is a Cal imperative to FS. What about number 25? Kumi, noticing that the accent has actually shifted to the first syllable away from the second syllable. Kumi. This is also a Cal imperative to FS. The tav at the front of the verb has dropped. We have kum, not kam, so we know this is not perfect. We have kum, which means it's either an infinitive construct, which we've not learned yet, or it's an imperfect. In this case, with the hirik yod ending and the tav preformative, it is an imperfect. However, the imperfect has dropped the tav, leaving the imperative, which is based off of the imperfect. Hence we get Kumi. Well then, last but not least, what about number 30? How do we parse this one? This also is a cal imperative, second person feminine. However, the presence of the na, rather than the heric yod at the end, tells us that this is a plural. We also notice that we have dropped one of the baits so that we get sovana rather than savovana with two baits. We just have the one. However, the tav has dropped off the front of this verb, making the imperative based again upon that imperfect form. The last section of exercises that we will go over, aside from your Bible translation, is the translation of 5 phrases. This is found in section number 2 in part 18 of your workbook. We're going to translate each of these sentences and discuss why they're translated the way that they are. So go ahead and try the first one. The verb kitvu is actually an imperative, and this is an imperative, second masculine plural from katav, to write. Write, followed by the direct object marker, and davarim, the words, what it is that are written, and then a locative prepositional phrase indicating where they're supposed to be written. Basefer, in the book. Write the words in the book. What about number 2? This sentence also starts with an imperative. However, instead of it being a second masculine plural, this is a second feminine plural from shamar, to keep. Keep, and then the direct object marker at matzvot, keep the commandments of the king, hamelech. Keep the commandments of the king. Hamelech being definite, therefore matzot is definite. What about number 3? How would we parse and translate this particular sentence? Once again, we start with a fronted imperative verb, kavtsu, gather. This again is a second masculine plural, you, plural, gather. Direct object marker is et, anshe is the men, and of the city, ha'ir. The construct phrase lending the definite nature of ha'ir to anshe. This is gather the men of the city. What about number 4? Well, if you haven't caught on yet, we also have here, once again, a fronted imperative verb, seek. Although this time it is a second masculine singular rather than a plural. You seek, et shalom, seek the peace of the city rather than the men of the city. But again, what's important here is that we have a second masculine singular from darash, to seek. And last but not least, how do we translate this last sentence? This last example does not start with a verb. Instead, it starts with a fronted pronoun, va'at, a second person feminine singular pronoun, followed by 2 second person feminine singular imperatives, kumi, laki, arise, go, and then the last phrase refers to the location, labetek, to your house, again feminine singular. You, arise, go to your house. That brings us to the end of this week's exercises. Be sure to review the imperatival form and the dropping of the preformatives in the imperfect. Make sure you also understand the vav consecutive in both the perfect and the imperfect, since almost every sentence in Hebrew has a vav consecutive.